Let's start again. Good morning and welcome to all of you. The host has muted you. If you are a participant in the service, please unmute yourself when it's your time to speak and remute yourself when you've finished. Our prelude this morning is a spirituals medley arranged and performed by the String Queens, a group some of you may remember performing here at a Music at Paint Branch concert in April of 2017.
Good morning. Welcome to Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church, meeting here online this morning. I'm Clark Ritz. My pronouns are he and him. I'm one of a team of worship associates that works with the service leaders, church staff, and others in bringing you worship services, even when it's best that we don't meet in person. We strive to be a welcoming community. We are from all over. Our families have come from different countries. Among us, we have a range of sexualities. We have a range of shapes and sizes and appearances and identities. We have different physical abilities from one another. We've been waiting for you to join us. And speaking of here, we acknowledge, though we're not in our physical church spaces, the land where our church's building stands is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people, who have a history going back thousands of years in this region, stretching from the Potomac River towards the Chesapeake Bay. Whatever brought you online this morning, we're so glad that you decided to share this morning with us. Before we move on, let's remember our Zoom skills. Find your mute button, probably looks like a microphone icon. Make sure you're muted for the service. Find the bubble for your chat screen. These are in different places depending on what kind of device you're using. You can set your own pace and scroll back up and down the chats. And a reminder, we're recording on Facebook Live and on Zoom. So right now in chat, please say how many people are in attendance via your connection. That way we can get a sense of how many people are attending the service today. And if you're visiting us for the first or second time, I invite you to post who you are in chat if you feel comfortable doing so, so that we may get to know you better. I do have an announcement. The Board of Trustees and the Conflict Transformation Team asks you to return to this meeting room today from noon to 2 p.m. for a town hall meeting. Sign into the meeting with the same Zoom link you used to access this service. We'll be reflecting together on the Racial Climate Assessment Report that was released March 1st. In case you did not receive it, please see the chat to get a copy of the report and related documents. The first part of the meeting will be a presentation of the report. The second part of the meeting will be an opportunity to reflect on the report in small groups. We will have some coffee hour breakout rooms open until 11:30, but the large group conversation will wait for the town hall meeting. And now, Chris McCann will give our call to worship.
Good morning, my good people. I'm Chris McCann, your religious educator. It is always a profound joy to find myself here again with you. Our call to worship this morning is called Prayer for Living Intention by Joseph M. Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Come, let us worship together. Let us also join in singing together hymn number 1020, Wo Ya Ya.
Thank you so much, Keith. I am now going to light the chalice. We light the chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind, the helping hands, the loving heart, and the radiant spirit. Encendamos este cáliz para celebrar el Unitarismo Universalismo. Esta es la iglesia de la mente abierta, de las manos amigas, del amor del corazón y del espíritu radiante.
Hi, I'm Marley Dias. Welcome to Bookmarks, celebrating Black voices. Anti-Racist Baby is a book that provides simple steps we can all use to be anti-racist and teach others how to be anti-racist. Anti-Racist Baby, which is written by Ibram X. Kendi and illustrated by Ashley Lukashevsky, will be read by actor and activist Kendrick Sampson.
What up, y'all? My name is Kendrick Sampson, and I'm gonna be reading Anti-Racist Baby. Anti-Racist Baby is bred, not born. Anti-Racist Baby is raised to make society transform. Babies are taught to be racist or anti-racist. There's no neutrality. Take these 9 steps to make equity a reality. Number 1, open your eyes to all skin colors. Anti-Racist Baby learns all the colors, not because race is true. If you claim to be colorblind, you deny what's right in front of you. Number 2, use your words to talk about race. No one will see racism if we only stay silent. If we don't name racism, it won't stop being so violent. Number 3, point at policies as the problem, not the people. Some people get more while others get less because policies don't always grant equal access. Number 4, shout. There's nothing wrong with the people. Even though all races are not treated the same, we are all human, Anti-Racist Baby can proclaim. Number 5, celebrate all our differences. You gotta celebrate, you gotta do a little celebration. Anti-Racist Baby doesn't see certain groups as better or worse. Anti-Racist Baby loves a world that's truly diverse. Number 6, knock down the stack of cultural blocks. Better knock them down. Anti-Racist Baby appreciates how groups speak, dance, create as they choose. Anti-Racist Baby welcomes all groups, voicing their unique views. Number 7, confess when being racist. Nothing disrupts racism more than when we confess the racist ideas that we sometimes express. Number 8, grow to be an anti-racist. Anti-Racist Baby is always learning, changing, and growing. Anti-Racist Baby stays curious about people and isn't all-knowing. Number 9, believe we shall overcome racism. Anti-Racist Baby is filled with the power to transcend, my friend, and doesn't judge a book by its cover, but reads until the end. Now, what are some of the things you can do to be anti-racist? All right, y'all. Peace.
Born with it, adorned with it, a gift to the world, gon' give it. Fearlessly made, no need to be afraid. Angels.
That's a good question. What can we do? Well, I read the PBUUC Racial Climate Assessment. I wasn't shocked or surprised. I've been learning that white supremacy and racism are baked into our culture. It doesn't have to be intentional or malicious or flagrant to still be there. It can be in the assumptions we make without even thinking about them. It can be actions or words that we don't even notice. It's not surprising to me that since this congregation is made up of people who have grown up in, or at least live in, this broader culture of ours, this congregation will reflect aspects of our broader culture, including this baked-in racism, I'm afraid, sometimes. At the national level, I imagine many of us saw headlines when Amy Cooper called the police during an interaction with the Black birdwatcher Christian Cooper in New York Central Park. He was not, in fact, threatening her, but in this country, it was reasonable for her to assume in her agitation that calling law enforcement would come out in her favor. On a more local scale, I've seen racist behaviors at places I've worked. I've seen someone loudly make fun of the Asian name of an IT technician he'd just met. I've heard another guy start a professional phone meeting with a complete stranger by immediately bringing up her unusual name and forcing her into an explanation of her Native American heritage. And I don't think those guys at work had malicious intent in those examples. I think they were amused or curious, and they were white and probably didn't even consider there ever being repercussions for saying those things. Their words were degrading in the first case, and in the other case highlighted someone's perceived otherness in a way that was totally irrelevant to the context. I can't really know how the people on the receiving end of those encounters felt, but I doubt it made them feel like valued members of the team. On a personal scale, I know that I do things like that too. I see myself in the challenges listed in our racial climate assessment report. For example, the report talks about racialized events going unaddressed. And I didn't speak up during those events at work that I just talked about. There have been times when I've spoken up, but many when I haven't. And not to let myself off the hook personally, I have attitudes and I make assumptions that reflect white supremacy culture. Our report also says that white silence is one of our challenges, so I'll tell some stories out loud. I had a colleague who is highly respected in his profession. I'd heard a lot about him for quite a while before he joined the office where I worked. One day, the chief of staff came in with someone as I was stepping away from my desk. I waved a quick hello as I was heading for the door. The chief of staff had to stop me to introduce me to this new rock star who had just arrived. I'd been eagerly awaiting him. You see, our new team member was Black. I hadn't even realized it, but I had assumed that this respected professional I had heard so much about was going to be white. I was so surprised that this new team member was Black that I completely missed what the chief of staff was saying for the next several seconds. This new guy was in his military uniform too, with his name emblazoned across the chest, and I didn't even look. I'd heard that name for a long time, but I didn't look. I'd probably just assumed that the Black sailor trailing the chief of staff with the paperwork in his hands was maybe an IT coming to fix the computer or something, and I didn't give it a second thought. So yes, this was only a few seconds long, and I don't even know if he noticed my surprise that day, but I still remember how I felt. We worked together for years. I consider him a friend. We talk about all sorts of things in that office, including race and politics. I hope he feels like I respect him. I can't remember him sharing any specific personal stories of his own experiences with racism. I assume that he's had them. I wonder if he finds it easier not to bring them up. And I remember another time I caught myself like that. I was traveling for work in a new city and trying to find a movie theater on a night off. I was walking pretty fast to make my showtime and looking at directions on my phone. I suddenly noticed that I was about to catch up to this boisterous group of Black teenage boys. I remember feeling fear. I also remember noticing that fear and admitting to myself that I probably wouldn't have been afraid if I'd stumbled into a bunch of loud white kids. Those are just a couple examples of times I've noticed myself with racist responses to people or making assumptions based on someone else's race. I wonder about all the times I haven't noticed. I wonder how that has affected the way I treat people. I wonder if there are things I've said or done that hurt people here at Paint Branch. I know that I'm white and I'm just not going to experience my race in the same way that Black folks, Indigenous folks, and people of color will experience their race in our culture or in our church. So I'm trying to listen and I'm trying to learn. The Racial Climate Report did find that a commitment to racial justice at Paint Branch is one of our strengths. So I imagine many of you are trying to do the same. I was a worship associate for the Nuns on the Bus service last year with Sister Rochelle. I look back on what I wrote for that one. The nuns on the bus are so committed to the values of their faith that they're willing to stand up for them, even in the face of opposition from their own church. I wrote about how I was impressed that they do the hard stuff. I think we can do the hard stuff too. And now, Kathy Bartolomeo will take us into joys and sorrows.
Thank you, Clark. Good morning, everyone. My name's Kathy Bartolomeo, and I'm a pastoral care associate here at Paint Branch, along with Lynn Lewison and Jim Flaherty. Our role is to offer presence and support to those in the congregation who may be going through some kind of difficulty. We're available to listen and support. Our contact information is in the chat. When we were able to gather live for church, the pastoral care associates conducted joys and sorrows and collected cards from the congregation during intonation and read them afterwards. As we gather in community, we carry life's hurts and its great joys. And we think it is still helpful to provide an opportunity for attendees to share these joys and sorrows. So during this online service, I invite you to share your joys and sorrows in the chat, and I'll lead a meditation after the intonation. And now the intonation music is Alabama by John Coltrane.
Okay, just a word about this piece. This was written and performed just shortly after the church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, that resulted in the deaths of 4 young girls. And so John Coltrane wrote this partly based upon the rhythmic patterns from Dr. Martin Luther King's eulogy for those girls.
Thank you, Keith. Now let's take a few minutes to acknowledge all that's been shared, as well as those joys and sorrows that remain unshared and yet are on our minds. In this quiet time, may our hearts open to hope and healing. May our minds open to hope and possibility. May we hold all these in one another in love and kindness, so that this congregation may be a source of strength and comfort, courage and hope in the days and weeks ahead.
I would like to begin this morning by offering gratitude for those that participated in interviews and conversations that make up part of the Racial Climate Report. Thank you for your powerful truth-telling. I raise appreciation for the Paint Branch Board of Trustees and the Conflict Transformation Team for all of their work, beginning with choosing and approving consultants through the rollout of the Racial Climate Report. I spoke with Board Chair Melissa Graham and Conflict Transformation Team Chair Deb Rubenstein and asked them to estimate the total person hours involved in this work. Combined, the two groups have given an estimated 632 person hours, nearly 16 weeks of full-time work if undertaken by one person, and that number is likely much higher. Thank you for your commitment. I offer gratitude for all of you who are here today and all of you who may be watching us later on YouTube. Hopefully, you have all spent some time reading and reflecting on the Racial Climate Report. How is it with your soul? What feelings did you have upon reading the report? Have those feelings evolved over the past week? Maybe they've repeated themselves? I invite you, if it's available to you, to write down your feelings. There isn't any need to reveal them to anyone, only to take note. I also invite you to pay attention to your body during our time together and during the town hall meeting later today. Your body and your feelings have much to teach you. Pay attention to the places where you lean into what is being said, and pay attention to the places your body resists, the places you may not want to go. I want to clarify definitions I'm using for some words I'll be saying during our time together. The first is racism. Racism equals race prejudice plus social and institutional power. Racism involves one group having the power to carry out systematic discrimination through the institutional policies and practices of the society, and by shaping the cultural beliefs and values that support those racist policies and practices. The second is anti-racism. The work of actively opposing racism by advocating for changes in political, economic, and social life. The third is white supremacy culture. White supremacy captures the all-encompassing centrality and assumed superiority of people defined and perceived as white, and the practices based upon that assumption. The definition of white as the norm or standard for human, and people of color as an inherent deviation from that norm. Race scholars use the term to refer to a socio-political economic system of domination based on racial categories that benefit those defined and perceived as white. I know that I have a visceral reaction to the term white supremacy culture. Maybe some of you do too. The term white supremacy evokes the insurrectionists at the Capitol in January, and surely none of us are that. The distinction is that white supremacy culture is an overarching guiding principle of life in the United States, cleverly hidden as normal. Fiendishly and intentionally hidden so that none of us ever question its normalcy. Our country was founded on the notion of white supremacy, and it weaves its way through the founding documents of the United States. It is a feature, not a bug, meaning that the United States is like this on purpose. Growing up Irish, it's a familiar story that around the turn of the 20th century, Irish immigrants looking for work would be met with signs that said, "No Irish need apply." This is because at the time, Irish people were not considered white. The work they could find was mostly alongside Black laborers, and as is common with co-workers, they would complain together about the boss, about their working conditions. Over time, these complaints became somewhat more formal, and Black and Irish workers started to organize to take on white bosses. The white bosses could not stand for this, and the solution was to declare that, wait a minute, yes, the Irish are white. We had it all wrong. Welcome to the club. Whiteness was bestowed upon Irish people as a union-busting tactic, and whiteness and the power it implies was more attractive than solidarity with Black co-workers. And to take it even further, are you familiar with the stereotype of the Irish cop? To solidify the entry into the whiteness club, the Irish were given the authority to police people, particularly Black people, particularly the Black people with whom they tried to unionize. This is how white supremacy culture works. It exists in every corner of American life. Our medical system, our housing system, our education system. It exists in our institutions, our politics and policing, and yes, in Unitarian Universalism, even in our beloved Paint Branch, even in my beloved religious education program. How could it not? White supremacy culture is the air we breathe, the water in which we swim. And white people have been poisoned into taking exception to the term, rather than taking exception to the reality that the term describes. While white people grapple with three words that make us uncomfortable, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are suffering real harm. To put it more bluntly, I heard on a podcast yesterday, while white people are learning, Black people are dying. I'm going to say that again. While white people are learning, Black people are dying. I want to make it clear that nothing I am saying today is intended to blame. White supremacy culture predates us all, and it is intended to be invisible to white people and intentionally, painfully clear to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We are not to blame for its construction. We are, however, accountable for dismantling it whenever and wherever we can, starting with investigating our own racial biases. I am also not intending to shame. Shame is impenetrable, and there is no learning or growth to be had there. Shame is not the point of this sermon. Shame is not the point of the truth-telling in the Racial Climate Report. I have been told by people that I love that if they ever stop pointing out when I've said or done something racist, it's not because I've stopped saying or doing racist things. It's because they no longer trust me to correct myself and hold myself accountable. It feels to me that the stories in the report are an opportunity for us to be worthy of the trust it takes to tell those stories. I hate to be told I've said or done something racist. I have a visceral reaction to that too. My desire is always to defend myself. I didn't mean, I was only trying. This defensive is instinctual, especially for those of us who believe ourselves to be, quote, good white people. We believe we must defend our goodness to the point that the need for validation of our goodness becomes the narrative. The point is, though, that my goodness is rarely in question. When Black and brown people tell me that I've said or done something racist, they are relying on my goodness to be able to hear it, to address it, to make amends for it. I believe that we can be more, we must be more than our instinctual tendency to defend ourselves. We can move beyond centering ourselves in someone else's story of pain, trauma, danger. Have you ever been there? When you're sharing something hard with someone and suddenly you find yourself tending to their feelings, they may have valid feelings about what you're saying, but their feelings are rather beside the point. And while you're busy tending to their feelings about your experience becomes lost, invisible. That's what we white people do when we center ourselves in our reactions to the stories we are told by people of color. To illustrate this point, I want to shift to the Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Institutional Change. The commission was appointed in 2017 and was in place through June of 2020. They were charged with supporting long-term cultural and institutional change that redeems the essential promise and ideals of Unitarian Universalism. The commission issued an invitation for testimonies from those who had been injured by a culture privileging white people within Unitarian Universalism and learned that people were reluctant to tell their stories. Quote, people of color, whether professional or lay, felt that they had told their stories again and again, reliving pain and traumatic experience to no end. Over and over, we heard from people who said they were no longer willing to describe the pain they experienced because after the initial shock and reaction took place, little changed. Some described this as a form of trauma porn, in which those in the majority culture got a voyeuristic look into the lives of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, experienced deep emotions, and failed to act in any systemic way, end quote. As I consider the Paint Branch Racial Climate Report, I see some similarities, mainly in that I had heard several of the stories in the report before reading them, and some of them more than once. How many times? How many times will we ask Black people to bear their pain and their trauma while we white people try to figure out if we trust Black people to understand their own experience? While we white people try to figure out what we feel like doing next. The good news is that we don't have to figure it out and create it from whole cloth, and we don't have to do it alone. The Commission on Institutional Change released a report called Widening the Circle of Concern. It's hard to read. It's hard to know that the institution of Unitarian Universalism has not escaped the poison of white supremacy culture. Far from it. As hard as it is to read, it's vital to the future of Unitarian Universalism. I encourage all of you to visit uua.org and search for Widening the Circle of Concern. The entire report is available online. I was recently reading Revisiting the Empowerment Controversy by Mark Morrison Reed, and he commented on how Unitarian Universalists are particularly good at identifying social ills outside of our walls, not great at identifying them inside the congregation, and particularly bad at naming them in ourselves. Widening the Circle of Concern finally begins to address this phenomenon and lays bare all of the promises that Unitarian Universalism has failed to keep. It addresses the way that UUism has failed Black, Indigenous, and people of color, because the Unitarian Universalist Association's founding and current documents and practices are also woven through with white supremacy culture, cleverly disguised as normal. So normal that even modern white eyes are only now beginning to see it, despite having been told countless times by countless people of color. Over and over again, this report names white supremacy culture, and we must name it. We must name white supremacy culture so that we can face it. And once we face it, we can begin to dismantle it in ourselves, in our congregations, and in the world. And this, my friends, is the new heresy. The primary definition of heresy is belief or opinion contrary to orthodox religious practice. The second definition is opinion which is profoundly at odds with what is generally accepted. I'm always confounded that we revere our heretical past the ancestors that paved the way for us to be in this liberal denomination and then consign heresy to the past. Without getting too in the weeds, the central heresy of Unitarianism was the rejection of the Trinity. The central heresy of Universalism was the idea of universal salvation, that if we believe the promise of a loving God, then surely God would not submit any of their creation to eternal torment. I'm not sure that we can fathom exactly how radical those ideas were in their time, the violence with which they were met. We are today involved in some radical causes. At Paint Branch, we are engaging in the renewal of our welcoming congregation commitment. We are taking on the climate crisis. We worked hard at UU the Vote. There is powerful anti-racism work happening at Paint Branch. There are so many ways that what we practice is profoundly at odds with what is generally accepted. And here's another trick of white supremacy culture. All of the things that we're taking on, patriarchy, climate crisis, heteronormativity, transphobia, fat phobia, voter suppression, all of it is discrete pieces wrapped in the package of white supremacy culture. White supremacy culture brought us here. Anti-racism is the hope of our deliverance. Seeing things anew, making radical changes is hard at church. Because no matter how progressive a denomination, church is an institution, and institutions are inherently conservative. If you doubt that, think of the last time you heard yourself or someone else say, "We've always done it this way." In the matter of white supremacy culture, I invite us into a new way, and I invite us to go all the way. Yes, to address discrete pieces of white supremacy culture and to take it on as a whole. We must practice anti-racism, and we must practice it with the same vigor we would practice any other skill in which we'd like to be at least proficient. This is not a practice makes perfect appeal, because white supremacy culture prioritizes perfection, and perfection would have us believe that if we can't be perfect, especially when the stakes are so high, that we shouldn't even try. My friends, we will not be perfect. We will make mistakes. I have no doubt that I've made many in this sermon, and I have no doubt that moving further into my learning and unlearning will be riddled with mistakes. As a religious educator, I have a soft spot for our kids making mistakes because it means something is being attempted, something worth the risk of not doing it perfectly or even particularly well. Usually, whatever is being attempted is done shyly, with sometimes painful vulnerability, and it is exquisitely beautiful. Let us be brave enough to try, to risk doing something imperfectly, to hold ourselves and each other accountable, to commit to the practice of anti-racism, not solely in certain committees and corners of Paint Branch. Let us strive to make anti-racism central to all that we do at Paint Branch. I am committed to bringing anti-racism learning and practice to the religious education program for our kids, for our teachers, and for our families. I am committed to supporting our kids as they define a process to adopt the 8th principle in community. I also commit to reviving monthly anti-racism resources in all of our publications. I hope you'll commit to engaging with them. We are also working on putting together groups to study the Widening the Circle of Concern report that I mentioned. The UUA published a study guide to help congregations work through the recommendations of the report. This is still very much in the planning stages, but if you are interested, please email me at dmre@pbuuc.org. My good people, there is so much ahead of us. The rewards of practicing anti-racism are much more profound than the discomfort that we feel. Let us become familiar with discomfort, so familiar that it fails to stop us and in fact guides our moving forward. May it be so. And now let us join together in singing hymn 1028, The Fire of Commitment.
In 1999, I began looking for a church home. I'm not sure why. I hadn't attended a church since I was 18, and I escaped as soon as I could. I visited PBUUC in December when the choir presented its Christmas service. While I enjoyed the music, the part of the service that truly spoke to me was the moment that our former co-minister, Jaco Tenhove, led the congregation through a moment of silent meditation. The quiet of that time, the space for calm and reflection, spoke to me. Following the service, I stayed for coffee and conversation. Introvert that I am, I stood in the lobby near a door. My memory of what happened next is foggy, but I remember two men approaching me. Jonathan Orms, who has since departed for Colorado, and Ben Peary, who passed away in 2010. We engaged in an easy, gentle conversation. There was no hard sell. They greeted me warmly, and they were genuinely interested in getting to know me. I felt welcome, even at home. I returned the following Sunday. After the service, I met David Haberman, who had become one of my dearest friends and my best man. David passed away last November. I became a member in March 2000. Paint Branch became a part of me. I have played many roles: worship associate, member of the Committee on Ministry, choir member, co-founder of DART, and others. Most recently, I led a course on the UU sources and was a consultant to the conflict transformation team. I have not been as active in the church during the past year, but as I think of the warmth and welcome of those who greeted me in 1999, the friendships and acquaintances I've enjoyed, and the experiences that have helped shape my understanding of who I am and what I believe, I know that Paint Branch is the place I want to spend my time, talent, and treasure.
My journey to PBUUC was short. I came because of Leo. Have you ever been on a roller coaster or other amusement park ride and had the ride stop because you needed to get off? I have. It's not my norm. I usually try to persevere and complete something I start. It's not always easy to do. From the beginning, my time here at Paint Branch has had highs and lows. I have considered leaving to attend elsewhere or just to be at home, but I choose to stay. Like being on the roller coaster, sometimes that choice has been scary, and at other times it's been exhilarating. Sometimes I'm just barely holding on, and other times I feel like I'm in control. Sometimes I find myself screaming, but eventually that stops and I reset. I choose to stay. And since I have made that choice, I try to find ways to make Paint Branch and my experience here a more positive one for myself and others. As a member, I attend services regularly, pledge financial support, participate in activities, volunteer to help when I can, especially when it comes to feeding folk, and I serve on various committees and work groups, including the Board of Trustees. I stay, we stay, because of our connection to this community.
In community lies strength of numbers to support the sick and the weak. In community, somebody hears me with louder voices to speak.
In community lies public purpose, to shield from the harshness of life, to offer and receive common friendship, to protect from the gun and the knife.
In community, we teach each other about science and art and sport. From this, we gain our vitality, and through this, our sickness is fought.
In community, others surround us. Their dreams, their love, and their faces encourage our hearts to prosper, our minds to accept other places.
In community, disaster may come, but grief shared and faith in our all makes death's pall linger less strongly. Our tears with others can fall.
In community lies man's ambition. Without makes larger our fears. Together we make sense of being and bring joy and length to our years. Poem by Sailing to Windward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina and Leo. The mission of this church carries on in these uncertain times and is more important than ever. We are so grateful to have the financial support of members and friends. Please give as generously as you are able. Phil will now post the information for giving to PBUUC in the chat window. This information can also be found in the online order of service. Our offertory will be Fables of Faubus, written by Charles Mingus to protest the actions of Orville Faubus, the then governor of Arkansas, my home state, who used the National Guard to try to block the integration of Little Rock schools.
Our closing words today come to us from Melvin Hoover. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it and build on it. We can't control the future, but we can shape it and enhance the possibilities for our children and grandchildren. We can't discern in the present the fullness of our actions and their impact, but we can be pioneers in our time, exploring fully the crevices and cracks where knowledge and new insights might be found. We can explore our spectrum of relationships and confront our complacency and certainty about the way things are. We can dare to face ourselves in our entirety, to understand our pain, to feel the tears, to listen to our frustration and confusion, and to discover new capacities and capabilities that will empower and transform us. In the spirit of the pioneer, let us now go forth. Amen. Let us join together in singing our congregational response, Fuente de Amor, Spirit of Life.
As a reminder, as Clark said at the earlier part of the service, on behalf of the Conflict Transformation Team and the Board of Trustees, you're invited to return again at 12 noon for the town hall meeting on the PBUUC Racial Climate Assessment. With that, I will extinguish the chalice.